no borders in my leftist wonderland. Get out of here, bigots. I don't wanna know ya. I feel your fear of FGM is nothing but Islamophobia. I wanna see labels on those evil GMOs. I think you'll find a real terrorist of them guys at Monsanto. Go, 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 go. I'm so liberal.
Last night, he asked if there's a big difference between men and women's brains. And he was asking as far as gender and how people express their gender. So if a man is a transgender and now he's a woman, does he have a woman's brain? And I was like, that's a really hard.
I'd really like to know
subject.
If that part about it, whether, for example, that I know that they can see in scans, right, when like they can see activity in the person's brain, and they know when a person's brain is reading, they can see the synapses going off, right, and they can see that in a man's brain they're reading with one side of the brain, and when a woman reads, she reads with both sides of the brain. Now, does a transgender woman born a man, does his brain read with both sides? I would think not. I would think their brain activity. So even if we're just talking about the brain, right? We're not saying that like their brain was born in a different body. Does that even change? Is that different? Has anybody studied that? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Right? But when my son comes to me and my kids still think I have all the answers.
They think you have all the answers to like life?
To everything. So they come and ask me these questions.
Why do they think that if they have Google?
That's my point. Cam will walk in and say, "Mom, what's the square root of whatever number?" And he comes up because he's being cheeky, or he'll genuinely have questions, deep philosophical questions. And whether it's something that you could something as simple as what kind of screw goes in what, power tool, and things that I may not even know, but he thinks I know. And I'm like, you have a computer, young man, and you have Google. So why are you coming to me to discuss things that's very simple to look up? Because you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to look them up, and then I'm going to tell you what it is. So you could just bypass me and just go straight to Google.
Do you think he's just like, fucking with you?
I think so. A lot of the time. But I can tell when he's really genuine. But my daughter does it too. They think I have the answer. So they come to me for everything. Like, you all have Google. Stop. But that's the gender thing. He comes and asks questions about how brains are with the gender. And whether there is a big difference between men and women's brains. And I know there is. But then when it comes to how one expresses gender and how one identifies, I don't know. I can't even tell him to Google that. I don't know. I remember seeing men that looked like women. I mean, they would wear women's clothes and have long hair, and occasionally throughout life.
You could be a transvestite, couldn't you, and not transgender?
See, that okay. I'm very confused about that in particular, because why would you, this is me just being very naive, but I don't know. Why would you dress as the opposite sex on a regular basis if you don't feel like you are the opposite sex? To me, it's the same thing, but I'm told it's not, and I don't understand the difference.
If I understand it correctly, that a transvestite is a man who identifies as a man who just likes dressing as a woman. They don't identify themselves as a woman. They don't think like they are a woman trapped in a man's body. They just enjoy dressing.
Why?
I don't know. Why do I enjoy watching the Rocky Horror Picture Show? I don't know. I just do.
That's true. You do have a good point. Yeah.
I don't know. Why do you ask me why? I need to go get coffee. Hold on. I'll come back.
Okay. Fish gotta swim, birds gotta fly. I'm gonna love one man till I die. Can't help loving that man of mine. I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. But you don't really care for music, do you? Well, it goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Well, your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof. Her beauty in the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to her kitchen chair. She broke your throat.
Okay.
That took long enough.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
My gosh. Like, I had somewhere to be. Okay.
We should give this a name. Man waiting.
Ugh, I hate man waiting. It's always
keeping
mansplaining and man waiting.
Man waiting. Keeping women waiting. Isn't
thought it
that
was the
more a
opposite.
woman thing though, to keep men waiting?
Yeah, I think so.
It doesn't matter. We're just gonna we'll just blame men anyway.
I'm fine with that. Men are pretty much everything that's wrong with everything all the time anyway.
I can't really argue with that. I know everybody gets kind of mad when feminists say this. There's a lot of truth to that though.
So there was a time that I considered myself an anti-feminist. And I listened to the plight of men in custody cases and longer sentencing in the prison system, and getting off easier as a woman for a lot of things. So I was like, the poor guys, boohoo, it sucks to be them. So I was really about equality and across the board, that no one sex is better than the other or deserves special treatment, and that feminism promoted special treatment for women. But I don't think that way anymore.
Are we going to talk about feminism today, or are we going to talk about social media?
I don't know. We talk about both.
Kind of different things, though.
Yeah, but one after another.
Okay, but which one you want to go to first?
Let's do social media.
Social media? Okay. So hold on to your thought about feminism.
Feminism.
I was watching I'd never seen a show called Geordie Shore before. The Geordie Shore? Is that what it's called?
Geordie. Don't say, oh my God.
Is it Geordie or Geordie?
Oh, I love you. It's Geordie.
Okay, so I'd never seen a show called the Geordie Show before.
Geordie Shore.
I'm watching it on TV. I couldn't understand anything they were saying.
Are you serious?
Not a word. And then I start tweeting about the Geordie Shore, and people got really into it, and they were talking. And I didn't know that Geordie's was a place? Kind of what is it? What is it? What are the Geordies exactly?
The Geordies are, it's a people.
It's a people.
From a place.
A certain part of the UK? Of England?
Yeah, Tyneside.
Well, anyway, they
like the northeast of England is where Geordies are from.
All right. Well, I'm fascinated by people who speak supposedly a language I'm supposed to understand, and I can't understand a word of it. But
it's a very unique accent.
They said film the way you say it. They said film.
Film.
Film. Yeah.
Film.
They, as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh, that's how Jen says film. She says film.
Film.
I always make fun of you for saying it that way. So I just thought it was you. I just thought like that's a Jen thing. But you did live in the UK, so you probably picked it up there.
Yeah, because I was there for a while when I was very young.
Mhm.
And I think that's where I picked it up. Because my son even has weird, he says some things very odd. And he said some kids at school ask if he has an accent, like where he's from. And I'm
Mhm.
like, to me, he sounds like he's from LA. I mean, it's just like everyone else. But
Yeah.
other kids say that they hear an accent. I don't know. I think he practices it secretly. But yeah, I think I picked up a couple things. Weekend. We talked about that before, I think, when it was annoying me that I couldn't say weekend. But I have to think about it
What would you
instead of
say?
saying weekend. Weekend.
Weekend.
Yeah. It's like garage. It's not garage, it's garage.
The garage.
Yeah. I can't say garage.
I've been listening to myself, my own voice, and when I'm editing our podcast, and I'm hearing myself say in some senses instead of some ways, and that's me stuck in Spanish, and I'm translating Spanish over directly, where because in Spanish you would say en algunos sentidos, in some senses, instead of some ways. And when I say it, I don't notice, but when I hear it back, I'm like, oh, that sounds silly.
Really? I've never noticed you doing that.
Yeah, because I say it a lot, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And it's strange because
some
my
senses?
first language is English, because I was born in the United States and then I moved to Chile later. But I've lived in Chile for the last decades, right? So, and I've lived very little in the
Well,
United
how much
States.
English do you use on a daily basis?
Since I've been online a lot more, but outside of speaking it online, not a lot. This is why I get a lot
Well,
of
then
I do a lot, like I write well, I think. If people see how my writing, I think I'm a relatively good writer because I have a lot of experience writing, but my grammar is very bad. Because I just
Right.
I don't outside of social media, again, I just don't practice it that much. Everything I read and everything I hear, anytime I write, it has to be in Spanish. So actually, I'm probably somewhat more proficient in my second language than my first language.
That would make sense to me, though, at this point,
Yeah.
if that's what you're using on a regular basis.
Yeah, I was
And language is easy to lose fast, too.
Yes, it is. Even your first language. So, for example, when I moved to Chile, I was in 7th grade, and then yes, it was my first language, and I could speak English fluently. But then I moved back to the United States for university when I was like 21, and yes, I could. My English was fine spoken, but you have to remember, I had a 7th grade level of reading and writing in English. I'd never advanced after that, right? I didn't go to high school or anything in the US. So when I went to university in UC Santa Barbara, suddenly I have to read hundreds of pages a week for each class and write long essays and university level, just like that. And I wouldn't speak with an accent, so people thought, oh, Lalo just speaks perfect English, but my English was not perfect, and it was very difficult to catch up. I was listening to a podcast from Joe Rogan where he interviewed a fighter named Yoel Romero, who's from Cuba. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
No?
He's a UFC fighter. He trained and lived most of his life in Cuba, and he doesn't speak English almost at all. So he had another guy.
Oh, the guy with the translator.
Yes, he had a translator with him, which is, I think,
I saw that.
his coach, I think, or trains with him. I wasn't sure, like the relationship between him and what's his name, Joey Diaz or something. There's another person who's been on Joe Rogan's podcast a lot, but he's more, I think he's Cuban American, not exactly from Cuba. So he speaks Spanish fluently, but there's a lot of things he missed. For example, like there's some.
Wait, I'm confused.
There's the translator. The translator was a Cuban American.
Right.
So his Spanish was fine, but not totally proficient. While Yoel Romero, the fighter, is from Cuba and can hardly speak English. Do you follow?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So there's an intermediary between Joe Rogan and Yoel Romero. And it's this guy, Joey Diaz, who speaks, Spanish relatively well. But one thing I noticed listening to Yoel, when I can understand all his Spanish, and then the translator back to Joe Rogan, is that the translator kept putting in curse words in English that Yoel wouldn't say. So he would say, he would say that like he would say that the coaches are like have 20 years experience in Spanish. Los entrenadores tienen como 20 años de experiencia. Son uno de los mejores en Cuba. Right? So he'd say that the coaches had 20 years experience, they were the best in Cuba. And then Joey Diaz would translate like, the coaches are fucking top notch. Right? And he kept doing that over and over. And the amazing thing was like after 2 hours of listening to Yoel, he never cursed in Spanish. He never said any bad word. So he's well spoken. But here in the translation, you would think this guy's just saying fuck and shit every 2 seconds. But he's not.
That's not a very good translator.
Right. So that kind of worried me. It's like everybody's going to think like this boy, Yoel Romero, is just cursing every 2 seconds. And he's not. He'd never said a curse word in the entire podcast. So
I saw a little bit of that one. And I didn't pay much attention to it. It kind of, But the entire podcast, he didn't swear at all. But the other guy swore a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes him seem like a little bit more of a badass.
I guess.
Like, I'm tough. Like, I'm a bad guy. But it's kind of hilarious that he didn't use any at all. And the other guy used a bunch.
Yeah. Like, there was some... It's mostly about fighting, and there's a lot of details about his fighting background. So that's most of it. So if you're not interested in that kind of thing, you might get bored for a lot of it. But there were some parts where he was talking about Cuba, and the parts about Cuba are amazing. Where he's talking about how people are trying to escape, and he would call it like an exodus from the country, and he would talk about how he felt blessed because he left the country by having a fight in Germany, and then he just stayed there, and that's how he left. While other people have to get on these rafts, and he would describe how like they have everything planned out in a lot of detail because people have done this so much. So they leave at a certain tide, a certain hour. They know what food to bring, how to stay hydrated. It's all like they have it down to a science. They do it so much. And Joe Rogan asked him, so are you staying here? And in Spanish, Yoel says, yo ya me quedé. He says, no, Joe, yo ya me quedé, which means, no, I'm not staying. I've already stayed. Like, I'm not going back. And then he started asking him about like, what are the major differences? And Yoel just like didn't even know how to respond. He's just, is it just the freedom? He's just like, yeah, you're free here. You have freedoms. You can decide what you want to be in life. You can decide the future of your family, right? You can say like, I want my son or my daughter to be X, Y, or Z. You can't do that in Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was talking about other people he met from Colombia who were trying to escape to the United States and how they would have to go through some parts of the jungle and things like that. And he said they would go in kind of parts of the family would leave before the other. And he said he met Colombians who their siblings or cousins had left before them, and then they're going through the jungle, and then they see that dead sibling or cousin in the jungle who didn't make it, who died for whatever reason.
Oh, that's awful.
Absolutely awful. So, and then I mean, he's just describing how they train in Cuba. So Joe was also asking him about that the Cubans are so good at so many sports. When they move to the United States, they're in this great shape. He's like, so a lot of people think you're probably using steroids, and Yoel's laughing. He's just like, steroids? You think we have steroids? It's like, people don't have anything. And a great example of that is like, you think we're injecting ourselves with steroids? We don't have, like, something you train with in the United States that we don't have there is like Gatorade. You think we're on steroids? We can't afford Gatorade. Where are we going to get steroids? So he's like, he said, you know what our Gatorade is in when we're training? And these are like Olympic athletes. So he was an Olympic wrestler in Cuba, right? And he lived literally on a compound for Olympic wrestlers in a building just for them, right? And he's like, in that place, how would they train? He's like, you know what our Gatorade was? It was putting sugar in water and then shaking it. It's like, that was our Gatorade.
Not even salt?
Not even salt. Because the electrolytes in Gatorade, right? But no, he's like, that's how they would do it. And so he said, like, where are we gonna get steroids?
Steroids.
Yeah, he's like, he's only heard when he was there for so many years training. He just heard of 2 athletes of all sports being caught with drugs. One guy was caught, I think, with steroids. He said, like a pill, and they can't even explain how he got it. And then another guy was caught using marijuana.
Wow.
That's it. No, they just don't have anything. They just don't have anything.
That's interesting. I never would have thought about that.
Yeah. Well, let's. Oh, what?
Wait, Geordie Shore. Speaking of Geordie Shore.
Okay, let's go back to Geordie Shore.
I was thinking about it. Okay.
All right.
So the accent is it's Tyneside, which is Newcastle, and that's where my ex's family, the father's side of the family, had settled. It was mostly in Newcastle. So I never went there when I was very young. We stayed mostly around Glasgow, which is another accent unto itself. But I remember vividly the first time I went there, and this is why it made me laugh about you. We went to what we would call, it's so racist, the Packies, but the greengrocers, but they always referred to it as the Packies.
Who would refer to it as the Packies? The
Asian people, the Desi people would say we're running down to the Packies
instead
of the greengrocers.
So the Pakistanis would say that?
Yeah, from his father's family, yes.
Oh, okay. So Pakistanis use that term themselves there. Maybe not all, but at least you heard it.
Amongst his father's family, they're quite low class.
Okay.
And they're Pakistani themselves. The Indians never used that. They would say the greengrocers. And I heard racist people use it in Glasgow, non-Asians. But I don't know whether the Pakistanis picked it up in Newcastle or not. But it was just a very strange. We were going to go down to the Packies.
Okay.
It's like, what? That doesn't seem right. I don't want to say that. But okay, so we're at this shop, and I met up with a couple of his cousins, the men of the family. It was like our first meeting or something. We'd driven down there. So it's just very vivid in my mind. I'm in this greengrocers, and I'm meeting a couple of his cousins, and I think another cousin owned it or something. It belonged to the family somehow. But the person checking us out, because we were getting some mangoes, because we were going to mango lassi, which is like a drink with yogurt and mango. Mm-hmm. They were talking to me, and it was a white person, but they were speaking to me, and I turned to my husband at the time, and I said, "Are they speaking English?" I don't understand a word that person just said to me. Is it English? And they're laughing at me like they're speaking English. I swear that was not English. Whatever it is I heard, it was some sort of gibberish. I couldn't make out any of it. And it took about 2 weeks of staying there and hearing the accent and the people talking for me
And
to
this was
understand
the
it. Now,
Geordie accent you're referring to?
yes,
Okay.
the one that you said you couldn't understand.
Yeah, I even posted a clip of it, and some people from Britain had to translate what the person was saying to me. I was like, "What?" Because I was watching, and I literally there was a phrase from a girl that I could not understand for the life of me what she had said from beginning to end, and I posted online, and some people were translating it.
So now I can understand it. I was around it long enough for enough years with family members and staying in the area because we would go a lot to go visit and we actually lived there for 3 or 4 months at one time. So now no problem. But at first, even having been raised with the Glaswegian accent, which is very strong, I could not understand Geordie's. So when you said that, it kind of made me chuckle a little bit because it brought back that memory of I was upset because they I don't know if I could even explain the place that I was at. It was like I was out of my element. I was meeting a portion of the family that the other side had told me was terrible. The Indians hated the Pakistanis, so we were going to go meet the Pakistanis finally, and I was terrified. These were the people my ex mother-in-law told me were like, drug dealers and murderers and terrible people. And they are terrible people, but the ones that had settled in the UK aren't that bad. So I was asking for reassurance from the family, like my ex and his family, to say that, it was going to be a good visit and everything would be fine. And so when I heard someone talk and they weren't speaking English, I thought he was making he did it on purpose. He told me that everyone spoke English and that it would be fine. And I don't know. I just lost my shit.
You got angry?
I started crying. I couldn't understand what anybody was saying. So you have to, okay. The person at the checkout who's white that I can't understand. They're supposed to be speaking English. The rest of the time, nobody addresses me in English. It's only Punjabi or Urdu. That's it. So I have a hard time just talking to anybody.
So it's
I was
Punjabi,
excited.
Urdu, and then an English accent you can't understand. So you can
Right. So I was
Right.
excited to finally get around English speaking people. And I was asking for reassurance that the visit was going to be well. I was already nervous to begin with. And they didn't speak English. It was stupid. But it's such a strong, vivid memory how upset I was that they were not that the Geordie accent wasn't English. It's so stupid. I can't believe I just admitted that on a podcast.
The Geordies are going to be angry that you're basically saying that they don't speak English.
Yeah. I think the only other accent that I had a really hard time understanding was some people from Cornwall. They have kind of I don't even know how to explain it, but their accents are a little bit hard to understand. And all Scottish accents are hard to understand if you're not used to them. I think I can understand them all, but other people would hear my auntie speak. She's from Barra, and that's an island off the coast of Scotland, and they didn't understand things that she was saying. I'm like, what do you mean she's speaking English? So I guess I should have known. I don't know. It was just silly. It's very silly. I was only like 22. I was just a kid.
Yeah, not everyone speaks in the UK like you see on BBC.
Received pronunciation is the name of it. It's the accent of standard English in the United Kingdom. So when you go on television or you pick up, that's what everyone thinks of as the proper British accent.
Do you really need a license to watch TV in Britain?
Yes, absolutely. And they will fine you. They have machines. They drive down the street.
That is so un-American.
Right?
A license to watch TV.
They can pick up on the signal. So they know as they drive down the street who's watching it without a license or not. And they will fine you. It's like a £1,000 fine, or at least it was when I was there. It's ridiculous. You can't even have a TV in your home. You can say I only use it to stream from, and
Wait, you can't
kind of fight with
have
them.
a TV without a license?
Well, technically you can, and you can fight them and say I'm not using it, but they will threaten you and threaten you and threaten you and try to make you pay the license fee,
Wow.
because you could turn it on at any time and receive the BBC, because that's all the license fee is the BBC license. And they used to have one for the radio as well, but they took it away.
So the license is you're basically paying for the BBC. Is that what it is?
Yes.
And
And everything the BBC does.
That's very odd.
It is very, very odd.
That's a very weird way of commercializing the airwaves.
Oh, that's the other thing I forgot. Black and white televisions, the license for them is cheaper than colored televisions, because there still is people still have black and white televisions, believe it or not. It's 147 pounds.
Isn't it racist to say colored television since you say televisions of color?
Oh, you're right. Like, it may be inadvertently racist. So it's 147 pounds a year for and a black and white license is only about 50 pounds a year for the year of 2017. So it's still, for 147 pounds a year, what's that in dollars? Like 220 or something like that a year. Yeah. So it's not cheap either.
Well, not especially for low income families. I bet that's not cheap.
No. And I don't think that you can get a waiver for the TV license, as even when I was in school and they were paying me a bursary, and I was in like with the socialized system over there, so you can be a student and have children, you get a child tax credit, then they help pay for your housing, and dental's free.
I don't
medical's
understand.
free.
So the healthcare is free, dental is free, but TV is not free.
Right. Well, dental's only free if you're a mother and you have young children. But after that, you pay. It's subsidized, obviously. But yeah, you have to pay a license for your TV. Oh, MOT is bad too. Your vehicle license fees are ridiculously expensive. It is the same thing as here, but the taxes added to everything over there. Like, you have a 20% sales tax, or maybe it's even 22% at this point. So on everything you buy, that's not subsidized, which is
that's
children's clothing.
Not too high compared to some other socialist. Some of them I've seen go as high as 50% tax for individuals, and a lot of times the individual tax for people is higher than business tax.
Yeah. And I remember we were paying it was like 83 pence a liter for gas. So if we wanted to go anywhere, we had to save up money for petrol to drive anywhere, because it was just so prohibitively expensive. So it was like $10 a gallon or something like that. It was just, I got to America and looked at the gas prices and the big cars and was like, this place is amazing.
So are we going to talk about social media? We always get distracted.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about social media. When are we going to talk about social media? It sucks.
I want to talk about my iPad, because I bought an iPad and I really like it. So I want to talk about it.
What's that got to do with social media? Are you hoping that
it has social media on it?
So do you want to get famous? Oh, that's a good goal. Do you want to get famous enough so that you can get free iPads?
Oh, that would be awesome.
Like if you mention it.
If I talk about my iPad, it's going to sound like an Apple commercial, and people are going to think I'm sponsored by them.
Yeah, but you're not famous enough to be sponsored by them yet.
I'm not famous enough to be sponsored by anybody. Even my own followers. Even the people listening to this. But with the amount of money I just spend on like URLs and stuff on like GoDaddy, I'm already in the negative. For
oh my goodness!
Online. What do you want to talk about?
Super famous, so we get rich. Well, how cool is your iPad? Let's talk about your iPad.
So, what I want to talk about when I got my iPad is how hard it is for people to transition from, how should I call it? Like, kind of, I don't know how to describe this, but tangible physical products. So what I mean by that is, for example, music.
Mhm.
You don't have to go to a music store anymore, and people usually don't. There used to be records, there used to be cassette tapes, there used to be CDs, and you'd hold the music in your hand and come with a little booklet and the lyrics, and you had it, right? You'd have special editions, and
You owned it.
you owned it, right? It's there, it's on your shelf. And it's
Mhm.
very hard for people to transition out of those things. And I think a lot of the people who even collect like vinyl, for example, they say it sounds better or whatever. There could be some truth to the sound as far as like their own ear. But I think mostly it's just holding the record in your hand, right? Owning it, seeing it. And now like you own music, and what is it? It's a folder on your computer. So it wasn't
Mhm.
that hard for me to transition out of music as much. I didn't care that much, but books, up until weeks ago, I was still like, no, I needed the physical book in my hand, and I need to highlight it, and I need to have it. I want the book, right? That was my
Right.
pet peeve, right? That was that was my kind of vinyl record, right? Like I needed the book. But the problem is I live in Chile, and Chile has a very high taxation for books. Books in Chile are very expensive. A book in the United States that's $10 could be $80 here, very easily.
And I think books here are expensive. Here.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, that's so expensive.
Oh my God. The last time I went to the United States and I went to a bookstore, I almost lost my mind when I was looking at these huge, beautiful first edition books that cost $8. I was like, oh.
I remember being at the bookstore with you, and you're like, oh my gosh,
Drooling.
the books are so cheap.
Just
They're so cheap. I'm
drooling.
like, no, they're
Yeah.
not. They're expensive.
The problem is books also weigh so much, so I can't, even if I have the money to buy them, I can only put so many in my backpack, in my bags, and start to weigh down. So finally, I was because of what I do online, and I want to have the books when they come out. Before I used to sometimes wait for maybe they come in the mail, or somebody could send it to me, or somebody was coming from the United States and they bring me the book, because to wait for a translation and for it to be here, then it's a lot more expensive, would be a lot. So now I kind of need everything right away. So I was like, okay, I'm going to start using
You're
digital
impatient,
books.
you mean?
Well, actually, I wasn't impatient about it. I could wait. But now I have to be up to date. Now, like, because I want to maybe talk about that book on a podcast, I need to read it now. I need to start reading it when it comes out, right? At least I feel like I do. But so I thought, okay, I'm gonna start getting into digital books. So a while ago, I transitioned from Windows to Mac, especially for all this podcast stuff for editing, because Windows and PCs were just too slow. So I transitioned over to Mac, and it works much better. You don't get viruses, and it doesn't break down. So I have an iPhone and I have a Mac. So I was like, okay, it's only logical that I get an iPad. I'm sure that like there's a lot of advantages to Kindles and stuff, but I bought an iPad. And oh my God, all the things you could do blew my mind. Like, you get the book, you just hit download, it's on your iPad. And then when I would highlight something or I'd write a note, the book is also on my phone and it's also on my Mac. And all the highlighting and notes and all the markings I do on the book are synced to all my devices. So if I highlight something on my iPad, it's also on my phone. It sounds like a commercial for Mac right now, but
It's kind of cool. It sounds cool.
But for a person like me, that sometimes I'm on Twitter and somebody says, well, where did this person say that? And I know they said it in a book, and I highlighted that on my iPad in a book, and that book is on my phone. The highlights are on my phone, even though I did all that reading and highlighting on my iPad. And I can, and I'm walking around in my phone with all these books, and all the highlighting, all the notes I took they're in my pocket. I didn't think about that before. I don't know why I didn't think about that, but I never thought about that. If I go on vacation somewhere, I'm still walking around with my entire library with all my notes and all the highlights for my books. That's kind of insane. But
yeah,
but
it's cool.
But then you actually you don't have the book, right? It's not like on your shelf or something like that. But I just find this new way of technology, it's very disposable, because you don't have that appreciation for the physical object as before. Like a record, like a book, like for photographs, right? We used to appreciate photographs, right? Because we would take the picture, we didn't know how it was going to come out, right? You had to measure the aperture and the speed, and then you take the picture and you don't know how you can't say like, oh, how did it come out, and show it to the person. No, you wait, you had to wait. And some of them were overexposed or underexposed or blurry, and and then you go to the photo lab and they print it all out, and some of those pictures are useless and you throw them away. But you had the pictures,
whole roll,
right? And you would appreciate those pictures, and you'd put them in books and stuff like that. Now you take pictures and they're in folders somewhere. Sometimes you could have thousands and thousands of pictures, and your hard drive gets a virus or something or like that, or it breaks down, you just lose all those pictures.
Yep.
I don't know. Our relationship to things, I think, is changing drastically. And there's some benefits, but there's a lot of disadvantages as well. I don't know.
Well, even I had video and pictures of my children on, those old video cameras, not VHS tapes, but the little mini DV video cameras.
Mini DV, yeah.
And I had those when they were very little, and in having to run, I had left everything we owned behind. So I have no videos of my children as babies anymore. I have very few pictures of them. I have no pictures of me during that time. Mm-hmm. It's like that whole part of my life is lost, because I had the tapes, but those too were also disposable. And if you don't have anything to play them on, they're gone too. Mm-hmm. So the only thing that I was able to hold on to was the photos that I'd printed that I had shipped ahead surreptitiously. I shipped a box to the States of pictures and things that were very important to me. I'm so glad I did. And that's all I have. And I even have my dad's baby book, but they're tangible. You can feel them. I won't lose them. I mean, I could lose them in a house fire. That's what happened to some of my other things, got lost in a house fire. But I feel weird not having things to touch. It's strange.
Yeah. I think the only disadvantage to these digital things is the loss of them through damaged hard drives, or losing a printed out disk or external hard drive. But that's kind of solved in a lot of ways too, because all the things cloud? Yeah, everything I have now I save to the cloud. So if I lose my phone, I lose my iPad, it's there. So, and there's dangers of hacking and things like that, but essentially it's a huge advantage. Before this is kind of between the having the physical copy of something and going into the digital age. If people lost their phone, they lose everything on their phone.
That's true.
Right, and then it was gone unless you backed it up somewhere, or if you had it on a hard drive, the hard drive failed. A lot of times it's just gone. But now with the cloud and all this, like now, I could take a hammer to all, my Mac and my phone and my iPad, and still, a lot of it is saved in the cloud. So that's they're kind of solving too. So,
and you're comfortable with that. Like you've come to terms with that, and you're comfortable with your information and the things that you own, quote unquote, being stored somewhere in a cloud that other people could hack into and access. That
I think you would. I mean, really, if I was a famous person, maybe.
I wouldn't store. Google's always asked me to store my stuff so that I could access it on devices. I won't.
What are you
my
scared that
devices.
somebody's going to hack of you? Like, what would they want for you? What could they hack and take from you that would be so important?
I don't know. I just have there wouldn't be any one particular thing that I would worry that they would take. It would be finding me, information on me. And I guess because I've already had strange things happen and strange people contact me out of the blue, that there's people paying attention that I'm not always comfortable with paying attention to the things that I say and do. Maybe that is part of it. But even before that, it might be part of the element of being an ex-Muslim and kind of hiding. I've always been really careful about my activities online, covering my tracks in a way so that you couldn't find me by something that I posted on Reddit.
Right, but you're in
the same name.
This is a very special situation where you're literally escaping from somebody. The average person, there's a lot of hubris. I think to people who said like, "Oh, they're accessing my information." These big companies, like, so what? You don't. I hear so much like people are worried about that they can be located or that their information is being used, and it's just you don't matter that much. You're just a digit on how much people like, Miley Cyrus. You're one out of a few million that they're saying people are into this. That's really all you true. Are. It's to be this paranoid about it. Everybody's very. It's a bit of, there's a lot of narcissism, and I think about it. It's like I matter and my things matter, and No,
you do. You make a good point. Even thinking about the reasons why I've been so paranoid about it, I may have good reasons, but my behavior hasn't always been what's the word I'm looking for? Rational. Because of my fears and the things that I'm paranoid about. So whereas it would behoove me to back my things up and put it in a cloud of some sort so that if I lose one device, I don't lose everything. Instead, I just manually back everything up almost every day. It would be better if I did that, and I think I would be safe. But I'm super paranoid about it.
So another thing about this, to talk about social media, is that about 3 years ago, maybe a little bit more now, is when I started being active online as far as like commentary, talking about atheism and Islam and religion and all this stuff. It was exactly, I think, January 2015. And before that, I used to read books. I enjoyed doing that.
What's a book?
And I had started using a website called Goodreads, which is kind of a Facebook for people who read books, where you just have a profile and you can add what you're reading or what you want to read. And I had read quite a few books in 2014. I think I had started using that website that year. And then in 2015, I maybe read one book. And then I realized in 2016, I hadn't read a single book in the entire year.
You went a whole year?
In the whole year? The whole year, I didn't read a book. Now, to give you an idea how much I read this month, Jen, I read more than 4 books. I read like 4.5 books this month of April.
So to go an entire year without reading is a big deal.
Right. And it was just because of social media. That it's
easy to do.
You just fall into it and you really get addicted. Twitter and whatever your whatever your poison is online, whatever your drug of choice is, if it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, a few tweets in the day, let's say one tweet on Twitter does not take 3 to 5 minutes. One tweet takes up a lot of time, a half hour maybe, because you have to add that you're going on Twitter, you're scrolling through Twitter, you're reading other people's tweets, you're opening articles, you're seeing what people are saying, and based on all this information that's incoming, then you start to think about what you want to say about it, then you write it, then you put it out, and then you start obsessing over if people are retweeting it or liking it, and then you start getting replies and you start reading the replies. So that one tweet between all of this could have taken, 30 minutes to an hour. That's one tweet. If you're tweeting dozens of tweets in the day and you're getting all these replies and you're interacting with people and you're reading what other people are tweeting about it and all this stuff, we're hours of the day. You can go into Twitter and you maybe put out 10 tweets or 20 tweets. That's half your day easily. It's not like one tweet is not 2 minutes or 5 minutes. It's a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And I got into it a lot, and I got all those, nice, what's it called? Like, adrenaline rushes from retweets and more followers and all this stuff and the attention you get. It is addicting. It's very, very addictive. And everyone acts like they don't care. Everyone will say, oh, I don't care about followers. I don't care about this and that. I don't believe that of anyone. I think anybody who has any kind of following, I think anybody who doesn't even have a following, if you're just on social media, you care about this stuff. It's almost impossible not to care, I think, because your brain starts to sink into this world where it's almost like a virtual reality where you start to look at your phone and you could pass hours and you're just staring into it. Yep. And you see yourself as your profile. And your actions, instead of just walking and touching things with your hand, is to tweets, and you receive, information by replies and all those stuff. It's just, it's a virtual reality of a kind. It's like when you're sitting in a theater, Jen, there's a moment where you're not aware of the theater anymore, right? You're not aware of the person sitting next to you. You're not aware in your room. Suddenly, if you try to imagine the last movie you saw in a theater, okay? Do you see the screen as the screen in a room with people around it, or do you just see the screen as exactly where the borders of the screen ends, if you know what I mean? You just imagine that movie, right? You don't imagine the larger world.
You become immersed.
You immerse yourself in it, and your brain borders that you're immersed into it. It becomes a movie is kind of a virtual reality. And that's how you remember the movie, as almost like a memory. Not with an expanded world outside of it.
That's true.
So, and I think social media does something similar to the brain, where if you try to imagine tweeting yesterday, you don't imagine the world outside of your, like, do you see your hand? Do you see your phone? Do you see your room expanded out that? Or if you try to remember what you were doing on social media, don't you just see the screen?
Yeah, and the little avatars become personalities. Exactly.
So all of this starts to become kind of a movie, kind of a virtual reality in your brain of this. And it's a virtuality that works in a different way, but I still think that's what it is. And we become immersed in it, and that's why suddenly you can be on it and hours can fly by, just like video games when we were little, or people still do, but
yeah,
that like I don't know if you remember, but I used to play some video games that I start playing, at 6-7 o'clock at night, and suddenly I look behind me and the sun's coming up. Right? Yep. I'm like, oh, was I playing for 12 hours? It felt like.
Or even reading a good book. You get immersed into that book.
Yeah.
And suddenly hours have gone by.
Yeah. So.
But those aren't addictive.
It's harder to stay stuck on a book, especially for me, especially having some attention deficit problems that I need breaks every now and again. That's the way I can get through books, is I need to take like a little bit of a distraction, then go back to it. But social media is a rabbit hole that you go down and you can just get stuck. And you can get invested emotionally in what you're doing and what people are saying. You can get outraged and you can get happy. You can get these emotional rushes from the attention. But then when you get negative attention, you become very start to feel a lot of animus against it. You start to feel very vitriolic and you feel like you're in a fight. And suddenly you're fighting and you're very emotionally invested with people and something that's going on with these. And these people could exist anywhere in the world, right? These people are not your neighbors. They don't exist in your real life. And you think you're in a fight with something that's very important, that really, if you went outside your home and your room and this little virtual reality of your phone, nobody has any idea what you're talking about. They don't understand the subject that's going on. They don't understand the controversy. They don't know who you're talking about. But it's so important to you. And you think, and you start, and we've seen this, right? Like how some people on social media, like YouTubers or people who follow YouTubers.
There was one particular YouTuber that was on Joe Rogan. Wasn't he using some language about the internet that Joe had to actually say to him, people aren't going to understand what you're talking about?
Right. It was the one
like
with one called Sargon of Akkad, who's kind of a somewhat popular YouTuber. I say somewhat popular because everybody's going to say he's very popular, but He's not. There are people who are popular with millions upon millions of followers. But he was on Joe Rogan, and he belongs to a very
controversial.
He belongs to a very particular circle of YouTubers that talk about social justice and feminism. And he was talking with certain terminology about certain people. He talked about a very famous, kind of famous feminist called Anita Sarkeesian, who's also a YouTube feminist who talks about video games. And he was also assuming that everybody knew who Anita Sarkeesian was, and everybody knew who all these players were in his circle, and everybody would understand this terminology. And Joe Rogan constantly had to stop him, like, you have to explain what that is. You have to explain to the audience who these people are. He's just like, oh, everyone should know who these people are. He's like, no, they don't.
He's in a bubble.
And well, Joe Rogan said that to him multiple times. Like, you live in a small bubble. People don't know who these people are. But it's easy. I think it's easy to understand how a person starts to believe that the whole world revolves around this, because you see people talking about something, you see a tweet getting thousands of retweets, and you think that's a lot. It's really not. It's really not. 5,000 retweets divided into the entire world is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. It's a drop in the ocean, right? It literally is a drop in the ocean. But you start to see that as everything. So I got into this and I got invested into it, and one thing that happened to me also is that because I started to talk about political commentary about religion, commentary about Islam in the Middle East, that I started to feel the need, and I remember even some people told me this, that I had to stay up to date with everything that's going on. Now that implies keeping up to date with everything that's going on in the US, in Europe, Middle East, and I live in Latin America, so I was also keeping up with what's going on in Latin America, Chile, Venezuela, Cuba. I also lived in Korea, so I keep up with some things there, and I try to keep up with all the stories everywhere. And you go a little cuckoo. You go a little crazy, and you try to start reading headlines only or pieces of articles. And I realized that by trying to keep up with everything, I became extremely stupid. I felt dumb. I felt like I knew bits and pieces of information about dozens upon dozens of subjects, but I didn't really understand anything in depth. And that's not really my personality to do that. Usually my personality is to be very obsessive about a subject, where I find one subject and I dive into it and I want to learn everything about it. And I had done the polar opposite now. Now you become kind of a jack of all trades, where you know little bits and pieces of everything. But a person who knows little bits and pieces about everything knows essentially nothing. You're not an expert on anything.
Right. That's why I don't comment on things I don't know about.
So I know a lot of people say like they take breaks from social media. I decided to not just do that, but also stop caring about current events, basically. Some things yes, and some things no. The funny thing is, I think
that's a really intelligent and smart way to go about it.
For example, I also wanted to go back to the subjects that I knew best. So instead of trying to invest myself in what's going on in every part of the world, I want to concentrate on the parts of the world that, one, I already know a lot about, and two, I want to concentrate on to know more. So there are certain parts like Latin America, especially Chile and Venezuela and Cuba, that I want to continue concentrating on. I want to concentrate on the Middle East, but certain parts of the Middle East, especially Saudi Arabia and Iran, Egypt, but some other parts it's less, obviously, but those are the places where I think that, especially on the subject of Islam, they're the most important. And Asia, especially because I did my thesis statement on international politics when I studied it on North Korea, and I lived in Korea, and it's a subject I care about a lot. So those are the ones I concentrated the most on. I don't know a lot about Europe. And so when people ask me about Europe, even if I'm on a podcast, people say, what do you think about Europe? Or they ask on Twitter, I'm like, well, I don't know. And they say, oh, so you're an apologist for the white supremacists in Europe. Isn't that a weird reaction? But that's the reaction I get.
I don't understand that reaction at all. I mean, I don't even, where would that logic even come from?
I can tell you. I think I know where it comes from. I think this logic comes from that people want to hear the opinion on everything from only a select group of people. So people don't want to hear about European politics from necessarily a European commentator. For example, if there's one commentator in the US you like, for example, Ben Shapiro, who's a Jewish political societal commentator, people want to know, who are fans of Ben Shapiro, want to know his comments on everything. On gender, on economics, on politics, on science, on everything. Because you like that guy, so you want to know what he thinks about everything. And since people want to know about everything from you, let's say Ben Shapiro in this case, Ben Shapiro feels the need to comment on everything. And also it's how should I say, it's more profitable and it's better to get more clicks and more followers if you're always commenting on what's the hottest topic at the time. If what's hot right now is to talk this week, if it's the hijab, you talk about the hijab. If it's climate change, you talk about climate change. Whatever hot this week, you need to comment on, because that's what people are looking for and that's what they'll share. And you feel the need to do it because everyone's asking you for it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, and then when somebody doesn't do that, they think it's suspicious. They think it's weird. Like, wait, why aren't you doing this? There must be some nefarious reason you're not doing this. Do you see?
Yeah.
But to me, it's just the more responsible thing to do. Other people, you're going to lose a click if you say, instead of commenting on, let's say, climate change this week because it's a hot topic, to say, well, I don't know about climate change. Why don't you check out this guy? You name somebody who's an expert on climate change. You're sending away your audience to someone else. Right? So
even though they're talking about things they have no idea what they're talking about.
Exactly. So I think I conduct myself in a very weird way, where I very openly say I don't know about that topic. And if I do know the name of somebody, I sometimes don't, because I don't even look into it that much. But if I do, I would say, look into X or Y person. But
right.
But leaving behind a lot of this and giving myself time to read books, I feel so much better after spending the day finishing a book. And if it's a short book, like a little bit over 100 pages, I can finish the book in a day versus having spent that day on Facebook and Twitter.
Definitely more fulfilled.
And the stress of social media. The stress of social media is pretty out of control. If you suffer from stress already or have problems with depression, social media is the worst place for you to be.
I can agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
You have to use it very differently than maybe other people use it.
So,
or not use it at all.
Well, that's kind of my experience on social media in the last few years. What has your experience been, Jen?
It's just super stressful.
Go back to the beginning. Go back to the beginning when you first got on social media, this whole world, because I want to hear like why you got on, what started to happen. Go through the whole thing like I did.
I've always been online. Because that was my only outlet to the wider world where I could meet other people. So from the time that I was old enough to connect to any kind of internet line, not even through AOL or anything like that back in the day. So I'm very familiar with forums and groupthink and the fighting that goes on. It hasn't changed much. It's just there's more of it in one spot, and it goes by a little bit faster because there's just so many people involved, things can spiral out of control.
Can I ask you a question? So, because I never used the internet or social media, for example, Facebook. I never used Twitter before this, but throughout the years,
I was on MySpace.
Like I didn't use MySpace much, but I started to use Facebook when you still needed a university account to log on. The very early years of it. But for up until 3 years ago, I only used social media, and especially Facebook, only for friends, only for people I knew in real life. Are you saying you always use social media to interact with people you didn't know? Because I didn't do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Always.
All right.
I mean, that's how I met my ex-husband, was through a forum that it was for university students. It was a Telnet talker back in the day when you had to type commands in to get into this talker and type commands to even communicate with people. And we got to talking, and that was that. And we knew each other for a week and then got married. I mean, in real life, we knew each other for a week, like had spent a week together. We've known each other for a while. So I'm very used to that world. What I do and what I've noticed my pattern is to use a particular social media network heavily for a couple of years and then drop it completely and move on to a new one.
Why?
And kind of rebuild myself. I get tired of it. I get tired of the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. I was on Twitter back in 2010. I was stalking Tila Tequila. That was my thing. I was one of those terrible internet, like famous people stalkers that like would pounce on every word she said to attack her. I hated her, and it was just I got it's so embarrassing. I got sucked into this bubble of Nikki Hilton and Tila Tequila and Paris Hilton. And
what year is this, Jen, that you're doing this?
I want to say 2009.
Oh wow, that wasn't that long.
Yeah.
Why am I friends with you?
Look, I'm not that person anymore, okay? So what I realized, and it wasn't a long period of time, but it was I was quite popular on Twitter under, I'm not ever going to tell anyone what that handle was, or that, I had a very popular Twitter account for a number of years under an alias. And
you gained a lot of followers from doing that?
Yeah. Because I was invited to clubs in LA to meet famous people. I spent time with Kesha.
Because of this Twitter account?
Because of this Twitter account, because I met people who also hated her, who were famous.
Oh my
And they
God.
became friends with me, and I'm telling you, it was a crazy life, crazy world. And this is just after me kind of leaving Islam and religion and trying to find myself. And yeah, it was crazy. So
Okay,
I got a taste of.
wait. Okay, stop. Okay,
Okay.
you had this Twitter account that became really popular, and you started getting invited to clubs because of it. Why did that
Yeah.
happen?
It happened. Well, there was one particular girl I befriended. She was in porn. She was also really good friends with Nikki Hilton, and through her, I was invited the first time to I can't even remember the name of it, but the cover to get in this place was like $200. I don't know, it was, but hot chicks get let in. And I just started partying with them, and then more and more people would start inviting me, and I started. Oh, it was really cool. I ate in really fancy restaurants. I went to really cool clubs and met a lot of cool people. I had 300,000 followers.
What?
And I dumped it in one day. I just deleted everything.
I didn't know
never
all
went
this
back.
story. I'd heard something about Tila Tequila from you before, but I did not know all these details. Please go on.
So I was curious if any of my because I also had
Oh man.
like I had my main account, and then I had my troll accounts. And I wondered if any of my troll accounts still existed back before the purge. This is years and years and years have passed since then. But I was curious if any of the troll accounts exist. And they do. A couple of them are still there. I don't remember what the logins were for any of them. But the troll accounts were specifically targeting Tila Tequila. Oh my goodness. I can't believe you're cutting all of this out.
I hope everyone is enjoying this episode, because this is the last episode I will ever record with Jen. I'm never speaking to her again. I'm currently blocking you right now on Twitter.
I have, oh my gosh. There was a time, like I went to a club with Courtney Samel, who was the daughter of the Yahoo guy. I think he owned Yahoo at the time. But I was only using a passport to get into the clubs because I didn't have a driver license. I was still everywhere just using a passport. And I remember going to one club, and the bouncer guy, didn't understand what a passport was. He just looked at it. He didn't know what the hell it was. And she took, I think it was $100 bill, and like slapped it in his hand. And he didn't say anything else, but he made a big stink about it until she threw the money in his hand. And I know people live like that, but that's not a life that I've ever been familiar with. And I'm looking at the way these people live, and I'm like, whoa, this is amazing. Just money, just everywhere. More money than they know what to do with. It was cool.
Okay. So we were talking about social media. How did you transition from popular Tila Tequila hater to what you do now as an ex-Muslim?
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
So, okay. Why I did that. Now I can look back now, and I can think about what caused me to fall into this world, and why I focused so much of my time and my energy on one person. And I was heavily invested when, what was her name? She passed away from a diabetic shock. She was girlfriends with Tila Tequila at the time. Casey Johnson. I was really heavily, I knew Casey Johnson, and I knew that, like, the whole, how do I explain this? I was so heavily involved in this life that when Casey Johnson passed away from diabetic shock, I cried. Like, I was so, and I knew her in passing. It's like I knew her really, really well, but it became a main focus because of Casey Johnson to take Tila Tequila down, because she caused the death of this person that I felt some connection with, even though I'd only met once.
So, but you had
Does
met
that
her?
make sense?
You had met her in person?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Did you ever meet Tila
I-
Tequila in person?
Yes. Yeah.
Did she know who you were?
Yeah, I was her arch nemesis for a long time.
So when she met you, she knew who you were, like that you were
Yes.
this hater on Twitter.
Yes.
Wow, this is a different side of Jennifer for me.
Yeah. So,
Keep this from your kids if you want to maintain their respect.
they're gonna listen to this.
Oh God.
But I was working through a lot at the time, and I didn't know who I was. I was very lost. And I found a group that they really liked me, and they thought I was funny. And I found, like we were talking about addiction, it was a drug. The popularity, the retweets, the likes, it was a drug, and I wanted more and more of it. And everything I did revolved around what I was doing online.
Mm-hmm.
The decisions I made in my daily life, the schedule with my children revolved around that life online. And at that point, I knew as much as I might dive into certain things and go into areas that aren't healthy for me, there's that little voice inside when it gets to be a bit much that says, nah, you need to just stop now. And usually that's helped me get out of, when I've gone down the wrong path. And that's kind of how that I was really missing a lot of life with my kids.
Yeah.
I was trying to work and hang out with my kids and then do that extra stuff. And you can't do it all. So yeah, I just deleted everything one day. And I stopped going on Twitter completely. I didn't pick it up again until a couple years ago when you and I started talking.
No, that was
and
3
got
years
involved.
ago. That was 3 years ago.
See?
Yeah.
That was when I picked it up again. And I'm not sure how I started talking about the things I was talking about. I just started a new account and I started talking. And me being an ex-Muslim at that point, I hadn't really been able to talk about it. I wasn't being public, so I wasn't in danger. We were still moving quite a bit, and there was still a lot of fighting and threats. But I inadvertently put myself in more danger by being so open on social media.
About being an ex-Muslim, though.
Yeah. But other than that, I was fine. There was no issue. But I spent quite a while on Facebook. You have to understand, I was working through 2 different religions. So I may have been Muslim that whole time, but that Mormon side of me had never gone away. And I still had the conditioning, like when I sent in my resignation letter and like had a panic attack and shook. And I say I shook for 3 days. I literally was shaking for 3 days because I'm like, what if I'm making a mistake? What if I'm wrong? And I didn't believe in it at that point. I was a Muslim and I was just starting to leave the belief in Islam behind. So it's a lot to work through. And I worked through it through social media. I worked through Facebook and through online forums, like the Mormon part, the Recovery from Mormonism forum. People write in and tell their stories. And so I was able to make leaving Mormonism a big focus of my life for a couple years. And then like 3 years ago, went onto Twitter and started talking about Islam more. And I guess the rest is history. I started talking about.
Well, what was it different? Was there any difference between the crowd you find now that is a totally different subject versus hating on Tila Tequila versus Islam and atheism and this stuff? Is there a difference? There's no difference.
I really don't think so. I think people behave the same way in groups, whatever the particular subject that you happen to be revolved around. The behavior of humans is very similar. So you're going to have the fights and the negativity and getting so wrapped up in it that you think it's your entire world. So when I've made mistakes and had fights on social media and it's kind of bit me in the ass, I was able to handle it better this time because I have so much experience with it. So I'm capable of setting it down and walking away and living my life. But I also am really careful to not get so involved now that I can't do that. Does that make sense?
Yes. I find that interesting.
If I was new, I wouldn't be able to.
I find that interesting because I have never been invested in any kind of public forum of a subject prior to this one, prior to religion and atheism 3 years ago. So I don't know if people act a similar way with other subjects. To me, all Facebook was, because I've traveled a lot and I've lived in many different countries. I have friends, close friends, not just people I met for a day, but people I was around for years all over the world, in Korea, Japan, the United States, and all over. So I only used Facebook and I didn't use Twitter. I only used Facebook, really. Even if I had another social media account, I wouldn't really use it. And I only used it to keep in touch with those friends. And
it was a lifeline for me.
And to have a lot of interaction on a particular subject like I do now with people is completely new to me. I didn't know what it was before to talk with people I had never met for hours every week on an international issue. So I don't know if people act the same way on different subjects, but you do. And I find it fascinating that people are essentially the same on no matter what they're talking about.
They're all shitty.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
But I had to live vicariously through other people and their stories for a long part of my life because I was so isolated and so cut off from the whole world except through the internet. Wherever I could find a connection in whatever country I was in, I was online and I was talking to people. I had to. It kept me sane.
One thing I've also realized about social media and the people who are online a lot is that, well, this is going to sound a little bit insulting, but the people who usually follow you in a very hardcore, dedicated way online, and they're young, are probably kind of socially inept people.
Yes.
Because I didn't use social media in this way, like I'm talking about. I only used Facebook to keep in touch with friends before until the age of, 36, 35? Before that, it was only a means to keep in touch with some friends abroad. Before that, I didn't really care about social media, and I would go out and have a real social life. I realize now that using social media a lot, it takes up so much of your time to even try to have a social life is very difficult. Now, I imagine that the people who use it a lot are not even trying to have they probably don't have a social life. And especially if they're young and they replace the social life of having people around them with the social life that comes online. And you find people online because you go online, you don't have friends. How do you associate with people? Well, you associate them around a subject. Whether it's hating Tila Tequila, a music band, a political issue, guns, or religion, or lack of religion, or hating on feminists, or being a feminist, or whatever it is, right? And when I went in on a particular subject that I wanted to talk about, atheism and religion, and something I was interested in. But in Chile, for example, nobody cared about this subject. Nobody knew anything about Islam or the Middle East. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Atheism is not a topic of discussion around people. So if I wanted to talk about it, the only place I could talk about it was online. And that's why I started to do it. But I didn't do it coming in to replace a social life. Do you see what I mean? I just wanted to talk about a topic. I had friends and I had a social life. I just wanted to talk
That's
about
a
this,
healthier way to use it.
right? But I think there's two ways to come into it. I think it's you have a social life and you want to come in and talk about a subject versus you want to come in and have a social life and it just has to revolve around a topic. And I think the latter is the majority. Most people who are really invested into social media probably don't have much of a social life and are very socially awkward and don't relate to people outside of social media. And I think this causes people to describe the world in an inaccurate way. So when the news or commentators or people talk about, wow, the country, people always say the country is like this, the people are like this. And what is their proof? They show you tweets. They show you a person who has 100,000, 500,000 followers on Twitter. And they say, look at what this person said. They're verified and they're very popular on Twitter. And this is what they're saying. This is what their followers are saying. It's like, oh, so the country's going down the tubes. To be popular online, to have a following that big, and the people who follow regularly that person, those people are not regular people. To be that kind of person, and especially now that I've kind of invested myself a little bit to have a following and to do that, I did it very late in life. And I see that it compromises your social life. And I'm not...
Why do you think I banned it for my kids?
I would do the exact same thing. I wouldn't let kids have a social media account unless they were... I mean, I'd like to say 15, but I'd really like to say 20, if I could.
Once they're adults, I've told them, you make the decision, you can make the social media, but as long as you live in my house and you're under 18, you are not having a social media account. And they're really well-rounded because of it.
But when people describe, for example, the United States, and they use social media to describe it, you're only referring to people, in all likelihood, people who use social media extremely regularly, don't have much of a social life, and don't a fringe group. And they're all, I mean, anybody who uses too much social media is probably very fringe and probably doesn't interact with the world at large, except for like some exceptions of people who became popular for their activism or what they do outside of social media, and they just gained a following. For example, a writer who's very famous and wrote a book, and then they gained 1 million followers because of their book. They didn't gain that following through social media. They gained it because they're just popular for something else. But most people, I would say, don't get popular on social media that way. Or most people who also use social media regularly, who are not popular, but they follow popular people, are also not that way. These are, when you describe the world through social media, through Facebook and Twitter, you're not including all the normal people who are out there really living their lives and probably use social media, if they use it, very marginally, who are not on Twitter or Facebook 5 hours a day or more. Most people, I think, don't do that.
I couldn't do it.
I think I really think I know the use of social media is very common now, but the amount of social media you have to use to really invest in these subjects and really invest to gain a following or to follow someone, I think is such an enormous amount of time. I actually don't think it's that many people who do that.
I agree.
And then on top of that, people will look at a commentator. For example, if that commentator lives in the United States, they will see the comments of that person, and they'll say, "Oh, look at this look at all these replies. They're so disgusting." And if the user is American, they'll think all the followers and all the replies are American. That I noticed that's a typical assumption, but no, like most of their following could be from some foreign country and really spread out through most foreign countries. It's perfectly possible you could be an American commentator and only 10% or less of your following is American. That's totally possible. And I think that's possibly likely a lot of the time.
Keep talking.
So I also think there's also too much information online where you can drown yourself in new stories and new things all the time. You can always watch a new video. You can always watch see new headlines. You can keep yourself busy every single hour of every day with something new online. There's so, like, you can't even try to consume it all. There's way
Something new
too
to
much.
get outraged about too.
Well, that's part of it, but just the consumption of time, like something to be happy about, something to cry about, something emotional. Oh, here's a woman hearing with a new hearing aid for the first time, and you cry to it. And then you see some person outrage you because they're saying something awful about black people, and then there's some story about a soldier coming back and hugging his kids, and you're everything. You can always see something new. Oh, here's a new cool interesting video about something. Here's a new music video. Oh, everyone's outraged about the music video now because the person culturally appropriated X, Y, and Z. It's just, you can keep going and going and going and never stop. And you can also,
at the expense of everything else around you.
And you can also start to feel bad that if you weren't online that day, that you missed something. Oh, I missed out on stuff. Oh, like everyone's telling you, oh, last week, we're talking about this and that, and you weren't online because you were on vacation, and you were placed with no Wi-Fi, and you start feel bad about that.
Like you're not part of it.
I think that it's much better to be ignorant about most subjects, but to know a lot about certain subjects. One subject, but it could be obviously more than one. And
be honest about the ignorance.
But for example, this month, I can tell you exactly the books I read. I read Daring to Drive by Manal al-Sharif. I read White American Youth by Christian Picciolini. I read I Am Nujud, about a 10-year-old girl in Yemen who was divorced.
Oh my goodness.
I read a book called I Don't Know by Leah Haggard Cohen. That's a book about the upsides of admitting ignorance. And I read the first part in the same month of In Order to Live by Park Yeon-mi, a North Korean dissident. And to do that much, to read that much and still do everything else I need to do during the day, I couldn't be online. And in the last month, if people follow me, in the month of April, I didn't tweet hardly at all.
That's okay. I got you. I tweeted for you.
But there's just no way to do it. I could not read that much and use social media. There's just no way. And I really have taken a break from social media lately. And I know a lot of people do that. Oh, I'm going to take a break from social media, but I'll be back in a week. And usually they're back in 3 days or 2 days because they can't keep away. But it's not necessarily a break I'm taking. It's also reevaluating how I use social media. So when I think I will start using it again, but not as I used to. I want to keep up with things that I care about. For example, there are ways to use social media that is a positive way. You don't have to go on there to just be outraged over everything. You don't have to get into long debates and long fights or get really emotionally invested in things that are very minuscule and mundane. And there are upsides. For example, when I was reading Daring to Drive by Manal al-Sharif, a woman who was protesting driving in Saudi Arabia, I tweeted some quotes from her book. And I wasn't trying to get her attention, but she saw my tweets and tweeted to me. And as I progressively read the book, I tweeted more quotes from her, and then she followed me, and then I could communicate with her in direct messages, talk to her. I found out that she knows in person somebody I had interviewed before named Sultan Al-Qasimi, who's a human rights activist from the United Emirates. I asked her if she'd like to be on my podcast. She might be. She's very nice. We'll see if that works out. But I thought that was actually really cool. That I can be reading a book, I can share it to people, and I can dialogue with the author in the other side of the world while I'm reading it. That's a really cool thing.
Really cool.
That's very cool.
Really
and that's
cool.
not the first time that's happened to me either, where I've been able to communicate with an author while I'm reading it. And I'm not like a huge user on Twitter. I have some following, a little, somewhat over 30,000. That's not overwhelming crazy. I'm not verified or anything like that, but I can still, communicate with some of the authors, and they're usually very nice, and a lot often agree to talk to me on my podcast, even though my podcast, it doesn't have many subscribers. They usually don't care. They're usually, if you're nice and you seem like you have a decent podcast, they'll do it. And I think so. There are very positive things to social media. Like that experience just this month, while I was trying not to use social media, and I could have that interaction with an author that I'm reading. That's amazing. If it wasn't for Twitter, I wouldn't be able to do that. So that's an extremely good thing about Twitter. It's a very good thing. And I've been able to connect with people through Twitter that have become very close to me, like you. We wouldn't have met if it wasn't for social media. So there are upsides. Exactly. You just have to
use it wisely.
Use it wisely and be careful. It is addictive. It is dangerous. It's
so addictive.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be very careful with it.
I have to be very careful to limit the types of people that I interact with, so that they're not overwhelmingly negative, and that I have to also allow all different kinds of perspectives. Not have to, but I find that I am well-rounded because of it. I allow and investigate all different sides. But if somebody has a different opinion or ideology than me, and is a decent person, but if they're not a decent person, and say if somebody is alt-right, I have a lot of conservative friends and followers and people that I learn from. But if they're nasty, I'm not going to have, I shut those people out very quickly. So I'm picky about who I let in, and I use it as a learning tool more than anything else. I also work through some things, and I think that I help other people work through things as well, because they know that they're not alone. I think it's incredibly useful, but you have to use it in a positive way. And I think when you jump on, I'm just a troll, and you're using it in a nasty way, in a negative way, in an accusatory way, where you don't feel uplifted after using it. If you kind of feel icky, you're not using it wisely. And I find that when I'm using it for comedy, to learn things, to get people's opinions, I've learned about so many different things about the Antarctica, about finance, religion, things I might not have been interested in the first place. I've learned about them and read about them and developed new interests based on the things that I've been introduced to through Twitter. So if I feel uplifted after using it, and after using it extensively on one day or over the course of a month, then I know that I'm okay. But if I start to feel negatively and kind of icky about it, I know that I need to change my behavior patterns. And it really starts with me. It starts with who I'm engaging with, who I'm muting, not muting, the words that I say, the words that I choose to use, because you're going to attract what you're like. So you have to be careful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also noticed that people are coming to the conclusion that people are getting more worse on in the world. Like everyone's more aggressive, everyone's dumber, everyone's more polarized because of social media. I actually don't think this is true.
I think it appears that way because of social media.
I agree. I think what happened is that before social media, there was a group somewhere, let's say the NRA and gun nuts, people who just love guns. They were to get together and talk about anything, not just guns, anything at all. If you liked comic books, if you liked Star Trek, you'd go to the conventions. People don't remember this. There used to be clubs, there used to be conventions, because those were the places you could talk to people who liked the stuff you liked. Before that,
that's true.
You wouldn't have people around you who liked the stuff you liked. It was hard to find people who liked the stuff you liked. So you would, especially if you liked going to a Star Trek convention, you just felt elated just from being around thousands of people who liked this thing you're so passionate about. Now with social media, you can do that very easily. In 2 seconds, you can find, endless clubs of, for guns, for Star Trek, for anything, for whatever it is. In your 2 seconds, you're in the group. But the problem is that you can also now see other groups very easily because they're public. If they're on Twitter, if they're on Facebook, they're publicly speaking about what their thoughts. Before we didn't used to, if you were a Star Trek fan, you don't know what the NRA conventions are doing. Unless it was on the news, maybe, but clubs that just in the middle of nowhere,
met somebody,
right? Or if it's just a middle of nowhere, just, get together of some people, you don't know what's going on. Things weren't recorded. They weren't put online. It wasn't for the public, for the whole world to see. But now we just see everybody. We can see what people are thinking. And it appears like everyone is crazier and more polarized and stupider. But no, that people are just, I would even say people are possibly less stupid than before because people do have more access to information now. But I think we just weren't aware of what was going on over there with this other group of people. We don't know what that in this next state over in this club and what people were thinking. And then we, not just the other state, but then the country over, right? And there's a club somewhere in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Somalia that people are getting together to talk. And now there's videos about it. There's Vice videos. There's articles. There's Salon articles about what somebody said in some club somewhere on a Facebook page. And that's news now. If somebody said something on a Facebook page, even if it's a not famous person, it can become news. A tweet from a total nobody with 5 followers could be news. And everybody's just like, true. My God, we're so stupid now because of this comment. The world is going to shit because, hey, somebody said something online. We didn't used to have access to thought of and the ideas of every single person in the world. It used to just be if somebody was on the news because they became famous for some reason, we'd know what they think. Reality TV maybe showed us the uglier side of humanity. Right? It gave us access to not intelligent people, but really stupid people just talking.
That's why it was so popular at first, because it was a glimpse into life you never saw.
Right.
For anyone. Now, it's like,
But that's...
Yeah.
But the world hasn't changed. The world hasn't changed. Now we can just look at the world. It's like having a telescope into everyone's living room now.
Oh gosh, you're bound to get stupid stuff being able to look into everyone's living room.
Yeah. So I don't agree. I don't agree that the world has changed in this drastic way. As far as how dumb people are or what people were doing, we just have a glimpse into it. That's all that's changed. Now we can see what people are doing or thinking.
Yeah, I already knew everyone was already dumb. My dad, like I said, my dad would always say, stupid people are easy to control, and the people around you that are stupid. And I just found them insufferable and did kind of I don't like stupid people. I care about them as people. I can't have conversations with them. So yeah. I don't know, but it does feel like that. Kinda. It's like, oh my gosh, the entire world has dropped 10 IQ points. What is going on? But you make a really good point. You're gonna get a lot of stupid back if you're listening to the thoughts of every single person. Oh, the other thing I was going to say, if you're well traveled, where people didn't know what was going on in the clubs and the other interest of people, you learned it from the news or newspapers or word of mouth. And that was it. You still mailed letters and all that great stuff. But people who were well traveled experienced life in other countries and understood that people were basically the same and flawed and stupid and violent and, also very loving and very kind. Humans can be all sorts of different things. But I think that it helps to be well traveled to understand the human condition and the human way of thinking. So it's it was easier to accept that everyone was kind of stupid, I think. I could be wrong, but I would think that.
Don't you think also that the mentality of people is that there are certain places in the world where just the world is collapsing, everyone is violent, everyone is like basically knifing each other in the street and just blowing things up all the time, because the only news you'll get and the only comments you'll get on social media from certain parts of the world is only the most crazy violent stuff, and then that's your only vision of that place, so you think it's in constant state of chaos. But really, most people and almost everyone in the world are just living their lives to a certain degree. It's not as bad as you might think. And I find this to be true of the Middle East, for example. There's a lot of things we talk about as far as how bad things are in the Middle East as far as human rights and civil rights. But I think some people, especially people who don't travel, have the vision that some parts of the Middle East are just, unless they're under ISIS or something, but that there are some countries that are just in a constant state of violence all the time. And you can never, like, they would say I would never step foot in this country because I'll just get off the plane and they'll shoot me. And that's not really how the world works. That's not really what people are doing. You could probably travel to that country and you'll be fine. But
listening to the news about where I live, if I read about Los Angeles or Southern California on Twitter or social media and online news organizations, even, what I read is not reality. It's not what I see every day.
Trump's America, all the memes and all the stories about Trump's America, how the country's falling into fascism is what?
Like what? So if it's like that for us here, it's so much worse for the Middle East. And anytime, the no-go zones in Europe, it is bad in Europe. There are areas that have, fallen into one kind of demographic. And so it makes it a little bit more dangerous sometimes. But when I read those kinds of articles or, everything is chaos all the time. Everyone in London is being knifed right now. And there's murders left, right, and center on the streets all over. I read those and I take it all with a grain of salt. And I understand that they're only reporting. They wouldn't report on it if it wasn't sensationalized and exaggerated. And the boring, mundane stuff isn't going to get reported on because it's boring and mundane. And everyone has an agenda. So whatever your agenda is, you're going to skew to that one side and report it. Like, all of Europe has fallen under jihadi control. Some of the news outlets you read, you'd be like, oh my gosh. But it's not really that bad.
And some people have an agenda for this stuff, and they'll purposely misrepresent some pictures, some videos. For example, there was one video of a street in France, and there was people all around it. It was so dirty. There was trash everywhere. It just looked like a mess. And then people were sharing this, not a news article, not a link to a YouTube video from a news place. They were just sharing the video, and they were putting as the context that, look what migrants are doing to France. And this is what Paris looks like now. But then a French friend of mine on Twitter said they are lying about this video. This is a video of a street after a festival. That only that morning it looked like that. But a lot of people in Europe or the United States who have a very anti-migrant, anti-immigration policy that they want to push, they want to give that perception, and they grab videos. And this is why I try to never share a video or a picture that the user of that Twitter account or Facebook account is describing a certain way without verifying from a news organization that that's what it is. Yeah. Even if I see the video, I'll try to Google kind of what it's about, see if I can find a CNN or BBC or Reuters video, something to tell me that this is what they say it is. But most people don't do that. Like, you could put up a video like that without a link to a news article. You can misrepresent it, share it out there. And I mean, I've seen people share videos of protests in Venezuela where hundreds of thousands of people came out to protest, and people would then share it as being anywhere else, Middle East, the United States, something. And I see the video, and I know it's from Venezuela because I had just seen that video on the news like a month before.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that happen too. And that tweet will go viral because it's this huge mass of people. But even they're describing it as sometimes the Middle East. You can see Venezuelan flags in the fucking video, right? But people
like, come
don't
on,
care
guys.
because
No.
it looks like a very sensationalist, crazy video that it can get spread around. And it'll get hundreds of thousands of retweets sometimes. And that's very dangerous. And so that's another downside of social media, is trying to get informed, is that everybody now can act like a reporter. So there's the democratization of information and news, which could be good because it's less in the control of big corporations that sometimes adhere to what governments or big corporations want. But the problem is that when you leave it to certain individuals have their own agenda as well. When people worry about the agenda of big corporations, individuals have their agenda as well. Everyone has an agenda.
It's a double-edged sword.
And people always talk about corporations being dishonest for their agenda. People can be dishonest too for their agenda. So, Joe Schmo in his basement is perfectly capable of lying sometimes. Individuals, unlike corporations, are not necessarily honest and truthful. That's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be very careful about even what you see from these independent news organizations. I don't know, like, it's hard to trust organizations that are very big, but mostly everyone says like, oh, it's all fake news now. It's very hard to catch, for example, Reuters, misrepresenting something. That's very rarely happened. It's been happening a bit with something like CNN at times. They've caught them do some things here and there. Mostly it's fair reporting. With individuals, I don't know their history, right? I don't know if that person is honest or not. So you just grab sometimes these news things. That's why when a lot of these new independent reporters who just finance themselves on Patreon, I don't trust them. People think this is like the new wave of news. I trust Reuters more than I trust some individual in their room with a camera who's getting their funding from Patreon. I don't like who.
Well, they're held accountable.
Well, who's holding that person accountable? Because in
Exactly.
a newsroom, they have an editor, right? Who has to verify everything is true, and they have certain standards and those standards have been established over decades, sometimes centuries. Does that person even understand what it is to scrutinize your own work, to make sure and verify everything? Do they know what it is to have a primary source or to verify the right source for a story? Because they're essentially just people in their room and they're just going out with the camera. They're just talking to somebody on social media. That's not news. They have no idea what they're doing. And people are saying, well, they're more trustworthy than a big organization. I'm not saying I just blindly trust a big organization, but I'm sometimes more suspicious of this kind of new independent media.
I agree. I want people that are going to be held accountable, and funding on Patreon and having kind of an agenda, because they tend to have one. Some things they might get right, and I think you just have to learn to be a skeptic. And I don't. That word kind of brings negative connotations now.
Not to most people, Jen. Don't worry about it. Jen is recovering from a group of people online known as skeptics that are pretty hateful and very towards the right wing. The negative connotations towards skeptic, Jen, is not general. You're worried about it right now.
You're right.
Yeah, the most general people in the world, you just go out, you step outside your house and you say skeptic, it doesn't have the connotations you're thinking about. But I know you're recovering from, what is it, the fifth or sixth cult that you're coming out of?
Oh gosh, I'm never going to learn. But yes, you have to teach skepticism and you have to be skeptical. So the wisdom that I've tried to impart on my children is to look at everything and ask yourself why this person is reporting this, or why they're repeating that information. What's their motive? And it could be that, they're an activist. Everyone has a motive, an agenda. There's something pushing them to voice things in a certain way that is going to give a certain idea to groups of people, right? So I always teach my kids to look at everything through skeptical eyes and try to verify everything you can. I'm not perfect at it, but as long as you keep striving to do it, I think that you're going to be better for it. And if you just don't take anything at face value, that doesn't mean you can't believe people when they say that they've been hurt, or, be empathetic, but also remain skeptical.
Yes, but the problem is, Jen, I agree with you. You should be skeptical, and you should check to see if what the person's agenda is and everything. But there's a problem there. I don't have that much time. I can't go on Twitter and check the intentions and the agenda of every freaking tweet I come across. I can't do that. The kind of time that would demand is insane. And for what? A tweet? One tweet? Like in the day? I can't invest.
You would
that much
only
time.
do it for those things that you're retweeting and that you're.
So what would be a more practical use of my time? To read a book and to see the reviews of that book. Because, for example, I agree. You should check the background. You should check it because there's always people fact checking and scrutinizing people who make statements in public. For example, a book. Let's take, for example, one of the books I read the month before, Troublemaker by Leah Remedy, right?
Mm-hmm.
If Leah Remedy was making up more than half her book and it was just lies, she names so many people. She talks about experiences she has and run-ins with people who are very famous, all kinds of things. If she was lying, so many other people would be scrutinizing, saying she lied. And then journalists and people on major networks would be like, we've heard from X, Y, and Z person saying that Leah Remedy is making everything up, right?
Right.
So there's scrutiny for these books. And because their books they're more going to be under more scrutiny. The person is popular, it's a bestseller, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm investing a lot of my time to read a book, and I can go to reviews and see that it's verified, that there's not people calling it out as all made up, et cetera, et cetera. That kind of investment in time to scrutinize a book makes more sense, but to scrutinize a tweet, every Facebook post, I can't do that. This is why I don't offer news to people. I'm not a reporter. I offer my opinion on the news. There's nothing to fact check. It's just my opinion.
Right.
Right. You can.
Yeah, but what if the news that you're reporting on isn't real news? You're offering an opinion, but you haven't fact checked it, so you don't know that what you're repeating is actually real news.
That actually has happened to me. I have posted news stories that I have posted and then realized they were like, it came from a fake story, or there was a follow-up that said, for example, it either came from a network that was a parody account. That happened to me a couple times, and then I had to say like this was a parody account, or it was reported by a major network and then they had to correct themselves, and then I post the correction. Now I think that a good way to scrutinize me, because this is the way I scrutinize others, is does that person, when you like they posted a story, when that story was corrected by the news, did that person post the correction? If I posted a story and everybody who follows me saw that I posted a story and that story was proven to be false, changed, whatever it was, did you see me update it? Did you see me post a correction? If I did, good for me, because that's the way I scrutinize others. If I see that they do make corrections, I'm more likely to trust them, because that story might have confirmed their agenda. But when that story changed, did they care more about maintaining that story because it helps their agenda, or did they care more about the truth? If they have a political leaning, that's fine, but they care more about truth. So they will update that story. They will post that correction because they care more about the truth than their agenda. I'll trust them more. And that's what you should do with all people. And you can see that over time. You follow people a little bit, you start to see, okay, that person.
Well, who's more trustworthy?
But
that's also using skepticism and just your daily
Right.
dealings with Twitter.
Because you can't fact check everything. So you have to kind of get a feeling of who's more honest online. Now, a lot of people don't care about this. A lot of people care so much about the agenda. They don't care if that person will post a story and then there was a correction and they didn't post. It was like, oh, screw it. They care more about the agenda too, the followers.
Yeah, I got retweeted a lot, so whatever.
Right. So,
yeah.
I mean, some people care more about the truth than others. Other people just care about the conclusion, the agenda. Depends on what kind of person you are.
I'm gonna demonize biotechnology, 'cause that's my liberal philosophy. Condemn the things that I don't understand. At least I've been a partisan, my leftist wonderland. Get out of here, bigots, I don't wanna know ya. I feel your fear of FGM is nothing but Islamophobia. I wanna see labels on those evil GMOs. I think you'll find a real terrorist and them guys at Monsanto. Go, 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 go. I'm so liberal.
You were just listening to an episode of People of the Podcast. You can check us out on YouTube, SoundCloud, and iTunes. Don't forget to subscribe and stop by our Facebook page and give us a like. You can also follow us on Twitter. Links are in the description. And if you wish to contribute, you can donate to us on Patreon. We have a lot of rewards to come, and with your help, we can make better quality content for you. Thank you for listening.